Hi, sixth graders. This is Mrs. Gall. Today we're going to talk about how to find slope using 2 points. Go ahead, get your notebook open to a fresh page, press play when you're ready to continue. The most important thing to keep in mind is that slope is the vertical change, the y, compared to the horizontal change, the x. So what we can do if we have 2 points is use our y's and our x's to help us come up with slope. This is very important. You want to write this formula down. We're going to take y2 minus y1, the vertical change, and place it over x2 minus x1, the horizontal change. Those 2's and 1's are not anything too fancy. We'll kind of talk about what those represent here in just a minute, but make sure you have this formula written down in your notebook. In a typical year, you would have to memorize this. Let's look at an example of how we apply points to that formula. Let's say we're looking at point R, -2, +3, and point S, 4, -1. I'm going to label those points so I understand which one is which. Now my first point is made up of an X and a Y. So I label those X1 just because it's my first X, and Y1, it's my first Y. That's all the 1 represents. It's just my first point, my first X, my first Y. My second point, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of x1, y1, I'm going to label my second x2, y2. Now you might understand why we had those 2's and those 1's in our formula, because when we go to place our values into our formula, we want to make sure we're lining up the proper number in the right spot. So we're going to go ahead and replace the y2 with our y2 over here, -1. And our y1 with our y1 here, 3. And we're always going to subtract the values. So it ends up being -1 minus 3. Same thing for the bottom of the formula, but now we're using our x's. x2 was 4, x1 was -2. So it's going to be 4 minus a -2. Even if that second number is a negative, we're still subtracting them. Now I apply my integer rules and solve the top and the bottom. -1 minus 3 would give us a -4 if I add the opposite. 4 minus a -2 if I add the opposite would be 4 plus 2 to get 6. That is my slope, but before I finalize it, I want to make sure it's in simplest form, so I can divide both numbers by 2 to say -2/3 is my slope. I would highly recommend labeling your points just like we did here so that you don't lose track of which y goes where. Because if you accidentally put the 3 here and the -1 here, you will get a different answer. So you want your second y to be first and your first y to be second. Just like the formula states. Let's try a few more examples together. Okay, so -4, +3. Remember, ordered pairs always go x and then y. So there's my first x, my first y. 1, 2 for point B, x2, y2. Now we plug in our values for the formula. y2 is a 2 minus y1, which is a 3. x2 is a 1 minus x1, which is a -4. So it's minus a -4. I go ahead and solve using integer rules. You can always add the opposite. I get -1 for the numerator. Add the opposite. I get 5 for the denominator. -1/5 is simplest form. That is my slope. Why don't you try labeling the ordered pairs and plugging them into the formula for this next one? Press play when you're ready to hear me walk through it. All right, you guys, for this one, 1 was our x1, -5 was our y1, 8 was our x2, 3 was our y2. So I plug those in, 3 minus -5 for y2 minus y1 over 8 minus 1 for x2 minus x1. When I evaluate, add the opposite, I get 8 over 7. Just a friendly reminder with slope, it's okay to have it improper. We do not want to change that to 1 1/7. That would not make as much sense for us when we're graphing. You can just leave it as 8/7. Let's try one more before we wrap up this lesson together. -1/7, -1/7 for E, and 5/7 for F. You should have had x1, y1 for the first ordered pair, x2, y2 for the second ordered pair. It ends up being 7 minus 7 for the y's, and 5 minus a -1 for the x's. We get 0/6. What type of slope is that if we have a 0 up top? That would give us a 0 slope. All right, you guys, if you have any questions, chat with your teacher.